So the last question that I gave you was how could someone in the days of Abraham know the reality of God, and what could they know if they had never interacted, say, with Abraham and lived in a completely different part of the world? And the answer is that is here in verse 19, where it says that what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them, which means what follows is going to explain how God has shown his reality to them. His invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made, so that they are without excuse. In other words, the visible creation allows humans to perceive the invisible God. Now, it's crucial to our spiritual health that we understand God as invisible, as immaterial, as not a part of this universe and not the universe itself. And the reason that's important, well, first of all, let me explain what God did to make that so obvious, or to leave such an impression on Israel that they wouldn't forget it. The first command is that they couldn't worship other gods or bow down to an image from the creation, made from the creation, and treat it as if it was God, hence the great sin of the golden calf. And the temple had no physical, material representation of God. So God made that very, very important, and it's still crucial to us. We might want God to appear to us every day, physically in some way, but God isn't physical. He's not material. So even if he does appear, he's not quite appearing in his true essence. We should think of God as always not a part of this universe, not the universe itself. He's independent from it. He's above it and beyond it. And that's important because otherwise we are liable to think we can control him. When we think of the wind, as powerful as a wind can become, a tornado or a hurricane or something, we think of wind as something we can harness and control and use to our advantage, like when we want to sail a boat across the Caribbean. We just harness the wind and use its power for our own ends. But we don't want to think, it'd be unhealthy to think of God like this. So God isn't like this, and it'd be wrong and unhealthy to think of him like that. So it's crucial we not associate him with visible creation. Nonetheless, the visible creation is like Michelangelo's David. If you saw the David, it leaves quite an impression on us of the artistic genius of Michelangelo, even if you've never heard the name Michelangelo or didn't know the history of the Renaissance. Just seeing the sculpture would leave the impression on you. You would be able to perceive the reality of Michelangelo. And in the same way, the creation is sort of like sun rays by which we feel the presence of God, the reality of God, and not just in an emotional sense, but in an intellectual sense. We can perceive God. Now, this isn't a philosophical argument. I mean, there are philosophical arguments for God that have been put forth, but that's not what I think Paul's talking about here. He's talking about what we can naturally know by intuition as we perceive the creation and ponder the impression it leaves upon us. Now, what specifically can we know about God? Paul says we can know just two things. In other words, we can't know as much as we can't know a lot, but we can know some crucial things. And the two things he emphasizes are the eternal power and the divine nature of God. And what that means, of course, is first of all that God is independent from time. He's before the universe, outside of the universe in that sense. And so if he's not a part of the universe, then he's eternal, and his power is unimaginably, eternally greater than any power we know in this universe. And then secondly, his divine nature, which means just sort of the basics of God's character that as Paul went into Galatia for the first time in his first missionary journey, he explained to them that we can know that God is good, that God is basically good, and God is fundamentally wise in the way the creation functions and operates, in the way it provides things for us. So, but can we know God so loved the world? Probably not. There's a lot of things that God revealed about himself directly to the nation of Israel and through his scriptures that you wouldn't know just by observation of the creation. And then our response, it says that when they knew God in verse 21, it says they didn't honor him or give him thanks. That is to say, that we should have at least had somebody who believes God, who knows God is there, would at least have some sense of gratitude to him as the creator, and then some sense of basic honor. I mean, if you stumbled upon a gorgeous ski lodge, a private one, in Colorado, you would be maybe in awe of the property, but you would also know it's not your property. Somebody else has made this, and it belongs to them, and so you have to honor the owner in a way that's different if you were just on your own property. So those are the basic ways that we're to respond to God. Now, the next challenge is also in chapter 1. We're going to do a few more on chapter 1 than we will do on other chapters, just because we're sort of setting the tone for how to think about the book. But here it says in verse 24, God gave them up. Verse 26, God gave them up. And in verse 28, God gave them up. And each time it says he gave them up to different things, to a debased mind, to dishonorable passions, verse 26, and verse 24, to the dishonoring of their bodies. So the question is there a logic to this progression? As we go from each place, each stage, or like cataracts and waterfalls, as you go down each stage and humans depart farther from God, is there a kind of logic to the order? Best wishes, and we'll see you next time.